Good morning, Oslo. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for being here. Before I begin, I want to be brutally honest about something, which is that I'm absolutely struggling to be here. Not because this is not the opportunity of a lifetime to put myself out there, but I'm absolutely physically, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise exhausted. This has been an 8-month-long adrenaline rush, day in and day out, getting by on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, feeling the pressure of what's happening to my family, to my people, being an ocean away, trying to speak, trying to put myself out there, trying to deal with pressures from so many different moving parts and so many folks that didn't even want me to be here, that were against me speaking here, as if that's somehow gonna be good for me or the people of Gaza or what's happening. I'm incredibly grateful to the Human Rights Foundation staff for walking me through this journey and helping me out to be here and all the efforts that it took for me to speak to you. Thank you, Celine. Thank you, Tala. Thank you, Malak. Thank you, Nicole, and the incredible community around all the Human Rights Foundation folks. So I want to please bear with me as I try my best to tell you a little bit about Gaza, myself, and what I've been doing. So I want you to picture a place that's truly complicated and defies the black and white nature of what we often see when we hear Israel and Palestine. I want you to think of a place that is so uniquely positioned geographically and otherwise. It overlooks the Mediterranean Sea, but it has no seaport of its own. It had a short-lived airport that I actually flew into in '99 and in 2000. I mean, who thinks of an airport when you think of Gaza and what's happening right now? It had vibrant communities, sprawling neighborhoods, amazing food everywhere, universities, schools, colleges, clinics, the ability to defy the desperation that people in Gaza had. A place that meant so much to its people, to myself when I lived there as a child and I left Gaza when I was 15, we'll get to that in a second. It meant so much to my family, so much to the people who have been in there for generations. But it's also a place that is rife with decades long of violence, struggle, bombardment, warfare, intifadas, complex regional geopolitics and global geopolitics. I experienced the consequences of that firsthand as a child. I was growing up in Gaza, and I lived through the second intifada, which began in the year 2000. And I experienced the physical harm up close when in 2001, as an 11-year-old, I was walking home from school, an UNRWA school, the refugee agency school, with 2 of my friends, when a massive Israeli airstrike killed both of them, Mohammed and Rajab, as we were passing by a security building, a police building belonging to the Palestinian Authority, causing me permanent hearing impairment and a lifelong struggle with trauma and PTSD. It was then that I knew that I had to get out of Gaza to be able to help my people. I could not tolerate the thought of facing more near-death experiences, something that I faced dozens of times. And I left in 2005 in July, 1 month before the withdrawal of Israeli settlements. It was seen as an opportunity. It was not the be-all, end-all, but it was an opportunity for something different, something new that could usher in a new chapter for Gaza to be the beating heart of a future sovereign and independent Palestinian state. Now, we hear a lot about Gaza. There are a lot of people speaking on behalf of Gaza. There are a lot of people speaking over Gazans. But many of them don't even actually know where the heck this little place is. It's a speck overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. You can see how it's both geographically gifted, but also geographically challenged by being squeezed in from all sides by Israel and Egypt. But overlooking the Mediterranean Sea gives it unique opportunities to be something that it never was. It is in the news all the time right now, as you all know, for the worst of possible reasons. And yet again, I struggle with trying to convey to people that before what took place on October 7th, Gaza was not this horrible place that had no life, that had no meaning to its people, that had starving children crawling on the floor. Gaza was full of life. It was full of hope. It meant something to its people. And so going back to a little bit about my journey, so I came to the United States in 2005 as an exchange student. It was a post-9/11 initiative by the State Department to bring young Middle Eastern and Muslim students to the United States, be there for a year, live with a host family, and then go back to your native homeland. So I attempted to go back to Gaza in the summer of 2006, but I was stuck in Egypt, unable to cross the infamous Rafah border crossing because Hamas had abducted Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier, starting a mini war in the Gaza Strip, closing the borders, followed on by the 33-day war between Hezbollah and Israel and Lebanon. And so a beautiful network of human rights activists and peace activists in the United States helped me return there to have a shot at a new life, and I started applying for political asylum, in part due to the broad threats of what was happening in Gaza, but in part due to specific dangers due to my participation in this exchange program. There was a lot of incitement against it by Islamist groups. It was a novelty in a Palestinian context. My interview for asylum was actually on June 14th, 2007, which is the very day that Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip. They won the parliamentary elections in 2006, and then there was a slow brewing civil war between themselves and Fatah/the Palestinian Authority. And so because I interviewed for asylum on the very day of Hamas's takeover, I was classified as stateless, a status that I carried all the way to 2014 when I became a United States citizen. And so I watched in horror as my people wasted away under a set of restrictions on the movement of people and cargo known as the blockade, an Israeli-led blockade that Egypt was party to. And I saw how the people of Gaza were caught up between two nefarious and evil forces. One of Hamas's Islamism that hid behind the resistance narrative, that wasted opportunities time and again, sabotaged the imperfect yet viable Oslo peace process of the 90s, weaponized the Second Intifada, brainwashed and Islamized the society, wasted the opportunity of 2005 to turn Gaza into the beating heart of a future Palestinian state, abused the democratic process of 2006 to actually move the Palestinian people and their democratic aspirations forward, launched a military coup against the government, and held its people hostage to futile wars and wasted a lot of resources, all in the name of resistance, all in the name of fighting the Zionist enemy, while wasting away generations worth of opportunities. So that was Hamas on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have Israel, led by the increasingly authoritarian and nefarious Benjamin Netanyahu, who absolutely entrenched Hamas's rule, who benefited from their presence to keep the Palestinians divided, to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state and the realization of the two-state solution and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And so the people of Gaza were stuck due to circumstances over which they had no control. And despite that, and despite the blockade, and despite the hardships, and I keep saying this over and over, life went on. There was some development going on in Gaza. People were resilient. The Palestinian people are some of the most resilient you will ever meet. They made the most out of the cards that they were dealt. They tried their best to make the most out of life in Gaza with the restrictions and with the blockades. People had loud wedding parties. Restaurants opened up everywhere because that was the only business opportunity that people could have. Students excelled in their studies. There were professional training centers. As long as there was no warfare and as long as there was no death and destruction, people were willing to push forward and go on and make the most of the cards they were dealt in life, until Hamas threw all of that away on October 7th, a horrendous day that I watched in the United States as it was unfolding. I was horrified by the killing of innocent Israeli civilians all around the Gaza envelope communities, the kibbutzim, that are full of actual peace activists and peaceniks who helped Gazans obtain health permits to enter Israel, including my dad, by the way. My dad ran the UNRWA refugee clinic in Jabalia, the refugee camp in Gaza in the north that's been decimated over the last few days. I watched in horror as this horrendous massacre was being celebrated and glorified as a legitimate act of resistance, as a legitimate response to Israeli oppression. And it's like, it wasn't even, there was no pretense that, oh, well, actually we're okay with attacking military sites, but we hate civilians. Before October 7th, it was the norm for people to be like, well, I don't like Hamas, but the blockade, or well, I'm not really into Hamas's Islamism and ideology, but Israel and the occupation. And then after October 7th, something happened to masses of people, intelligent people, professors, professionals, business people, activists, human rights people, leftists, liberals, to where there was this mass embrace of Hamas that I honestly thought, not only for, I mean, aside from the fact that it's ethically and morally wrong, I thought was incredibly harmful to the just and urgent Palestinian aspirations for self-determination, for independence, for sovereignty and liberation. I knew that Gaza as we knew it would cease to exist, and that my family, like millions of Gazans, would pay the ultimate price for what Hamas had just done at the behest of the Islamic Republic of Iran and other regional resistance players in the resistance axis. My worst fears became true, unfortunately, when 3 separate Israeli airstrikes on October 13th, October 25th, and December 14th killed over 31 of my family members and relatives. My uncle Riyadh, Dad's youngest brother on the far left, who was a day laborer in Israel and suffered from mental illness, yet he was an incredible father to his 5 children. My uncle Ibrahim, who was an English teacher and taught me quite a bit of my English, who barely survived the bombardment with horrendous injury. 12-year-old Farah, who's one of a twin and loved to celebrate Valentine's Day in style with her twin sister, who didn't know that Farah passed away for 2 weeks. My uncle Abdullah and Yahya, my mom's middle brother, my cousin Yahya, who loved having us over, loved going over to the beach and having picnics, and I played a lot of video games with my cousin Yahya, and that's the other half of how I learned a lot of my English. My Aunt Zainab, who loved feeding people, and her house in Rafah was, we called it the open buffet because you never left hungry. My cousin Heba, who was shredded to pieces and yet was one of the sweetest, kindest, only child that you could ever meet. Children as young as 3 and 4 months old, reduced to mushy tissue under the rubble that took days to retrieve. All of these people that you see in here, with the exception of Uncle Ibrahim, came out as charred remains, dismembered, headless, cut up in pieces. And after this tragedy, I was faced with a kind of like a decision to make. Do I want to double down on what I'm doing right now, which is to condemn Hamas while also being able to attack the violent settlements in the West Bank, attack the occupation, speak out against the injustices that the Palestinian people have experienced, speak out against the conduct of the military operation that got my family killed? I will never understand why 31 of my family members are dead. They were not involved in Hamas. There was no rockets being fired near them, and yet they, like tens of thousands of Palestinians, have paid the ultimate price for a sin that they did not commit. So I decided to put myself out there, and on October 7th, I started just tweeting on Twitter. I had 3 Twitter followers on October 7th, and I started putting myself out there, leveraging my lived experience as a Gazan, somebody with a unique background, somebody with skin in the game, somebody with family there. This is not an intellectual exercise. This is not some slogan to say at a protest or go to a college demonstration and have an encampment. This is life and death. This is about my blood and family, who had no options to escape Gaza. So I started writing, connecting with the Israelis and Jews, bereaved Israeli families, hostage families, those who wanted to reach out to the other side and build bridges across our differences. I was desperate to find the slightest of common ground across, the 2 entrenched narratives of you're either pro this side or you're pro that side. Everything became very black and white, very entrenched. No ability whatsoever to hold any nuance. And I understand that people are emotional. I understand that people are upset by what's happening. Yet I wanted to be different. I wanted to break that cycle of incitement, hatred, violence, revenge, rinse and repeat. I wanted to honor the memory of my family members by using their legacy to build towards a better future for both Palestinians and Israelis. I connected with different NGOs. I speak to college students. I speak to synagogues, to Jewish community centers. I speak to groups. I write for different publications. I also wanted to focus on the humanitarian side of things, and that's why I focused heavily on the airdrops as a stopgap measure, not the be-all, end-all, but because of the delivery and the humanitarian disaster that is unfolding in Gaza. I mean, the hospitals are gone, the schools, the universities, the roads, the water. I mean, it's endless, but I wanted to feed people because I saw my own nieces and nephews and how they've lost half of their weight. I got my brother's wife and 4 children out of Gaza 1 day before the invasion of the Rafah border crossing and the southern city. And I went to Egypt and got them to safety. It has not been an easy path to take, for I receive a ton of hate from both sides. I am regularly attacked, called a collaborator, a traitor, a sellout, a Zionist bootlicker. Or by the other side, I am called you're just a plant, you're a wolf in sheep's clothes, you're a true anti-Semite. Some believe that peace means complete acquiescence to the Israeli narrative, and that as a Palestinian pushing for peace, I can never challenge anything with any Israeli policies, lest I be called an anti-Semite. And so, on the other hand, what keeps me going is that I receive an incredible amount of love from both Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs, often in private, who tell me that you're saying what we believe to be true, but we have a hard time saying it publicly, either because they're in their communities, or they're afraid, or they're not aware of the different issues. Or on the other hand, I can't tell you the thousands, literally thousands, no exaggeration, and I have the screenshots, I have the receipts, of Israelis and diaspora Jews who tell me that you helped me humanize the Palestinian people. Through the tragedy of your family and how you've chosen to proceed and speak about it, you've forced me to understand that actually there are innocent, uninvolved civilians in Israel, in Gaza. Actually, what we were told right after October 7th, that all Gazans, the dehumanization of the Palestinian people, that they're all bloodthirsty animals who just want to kill and murder Jews, is not true. And that while I may despise Hamas and want the end of their rule, and I support the IDF, blah, 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 I will now forever remember that there are innocent Palestinian people. And thank you for helping me doing that. So we're in Norway, a nation and a people that have been, I think, incredible allies of the Palestinian people. And so what can be done in the short to medium term, aside from the fact that there needs to be a surging of humanitarian aid, medical supplies, and food? Number one is some sort of support for the resumption of education in the Gaza Strip. My family members, my friends, my allies, my community, they've lost an entire year worth of academic instructions. Schools and universities are gone. It's going to take years to restart that process. So we need some kind of a hybrid model between online learning and some kind of remote instructions to help students in schools and university learners resume some of their studies so that education, the wheel of education, can resume. Number two is, I think there's a unique opportunity to empower civil society, both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories and in Palestine, to create lasting roots for an actual cultural transformation, the rebranding of peace as a courageous evolution that is necessary and needed to preserve the Palestinian people on what remains of their land, and to also create this bottom-up approach to peace that can complement these top-down, negotiated settlements between political leaders. And so civil society can play a vital role in making that happen. And then the third thing is to help the Palestinian people preserve and develop the Gaza gas field, to finance the building of a new Palestinian nation that has a chance to be an independent and a sovereign country, again, building off of the historic Oslo peace process that Norway contributed to, and the recent recognition of Palestine as a state. But none of that means anything while the war is going on. We need to stop this war right now. We need a lasting and a durable ceasefire. We need the release of Israeli hostages, the freeing of Palestinian political prisoners and arbitrarily detained Palestinians, including my sister-in-law's brother, who was scooped up by the Israeli military during this assault in Rafah, right, in Khan Yunis, for no fault of his own. They were just rounding up all the men. It's been 4 months since we've heard anything about him. We don't know if he's alive or dead. Something like 10,000 Palestinian men were taken, including boys, and young boys were taken. Something like maybe 1,500 were released, but we don't know anything about the rest. The infamous detentions in the West Bank of administrative detentions. And lastly, we need to initiate political transformation in Gaza to get us beyond Hamas, in the West Bank to deal with the occupation and the settlements, in Israel to get us beyond the rule of Netanyahu and the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotriches of the world and all the right-wingers that have taken Israel in a horrendous direction. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today as a survivor and an optimistic believer in a better future for both the Palestinians and the Israelis, if we will it, if we work towards it. And that might not be what some people want to hear right now. That might not be a popular sentiment, but it needs to be said, and I will never waver from this sentiment. I will stand by it, even if I get attacked, even if it ultimately costs me my life, for I absolutely believe in it. There's much to be done. Let's get to work. Thank you. Thank you.